Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project Podcast. My name is Patrick Cummings. As always, I'm here with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week on the show, we aim to simplify the science of nutrition, health, and fitness, cutting through the noise to focus on the principles and practices that will help you perform better, feel better, and live better. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, E.C. How are you?
Good. What are you doing? How are you doing?
What am I doing? I'm recording a podcast with a friend of mine. What are you doing?
Okay. I guess that's what I'm doing too.
And I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. We're going to talk about rest days today, which it maybe sounds like you need.
I think so. Yeah, based on that wrong question. Yeah.
We're going to talk about rest days. And this is actually, the whole thing is prompted from a note, an email, a communication. I don't know how she sent it over from Kelsey.
Yeah, email.
So I'm just going to read it because I think it's going to get us into the conversation perfectly. This is from Kelsey. I was wondering if you might do a podcast episode about rest days. Yes, Kelsey, we will. Who needs them? How often, etc.? Do they actually improve performance and or prevent injury? Is there a certain amount of rest that seems to optimize performance? Should rest days include some low intensity movement like walking, or are they best spent on the couch? I feel like this topic has a lot of internet chatter without a lot of science or evidence, like so many topics. I usually work out 6 to 7 days a week and sometimes wonder if I should take more rest days. I know working out that often is not necessary, but I just really enjoy my time in the gym and feel that it keeps me in a better mental space. I've been doing CrossFit for 2.5 years with no significant injuries. I've made pretty steady progress, but recently feel like I'm starting to plateau. I know that's normal at this stage of training, but I'm wondering if adding in more rest days would be beneficial. Thank you, Kelsey. Where shall we begin, EC?
Yeah, she's definitely covered a lot of important variables to consider around rest days. That's why we just wanted to use that as our outline. But yeah, I feel like the statement that she said, I feel like this topic has a lot of internet chatter without a lot of science or evidence, is actually where to start. Because I think like most things that we seem to discuss here, it sounds like so basic of a concept. Like just talk about rest days, EC. Just keep it simple. Give me some guidelines.
Yeah. Good, bad, how many?
I know.
Can we just get over it?
Can we just get a quick, short answer? And then it's like somehow evolves into this nuanced and complicated no answer, right? And turns out rest days are no different.
More research needs to be done.
More research needs to be done, Kelsey. But I mean, like part of the problem with the rest days is just, first of all, defining it. What's a rest day? Let alone testing rest days in an infinite number of schedules. Is it 2 days a week? Is it 1 day a week? And then infinite number of different sports out there. I mean, we don't really have a ton of evidence to say, okay, this is going to be the best workout rest schedule to follow. And really think about it in the sense of each person is going to have a different tolerance for stress, which of course what a training session or exercise session is. And then how hard they go in each session relative to their upper capacity is really what's going to dictate if they need rest. So if you were to take, a CrossFit Games athlete, and let's just say that you say, okay, go do a 20-minute AMRAP workout at some relatively moderate effort for them. You could argue that's a rest day for them. Now, whatever score they produce at their moderate effort for them would be something crazy hard for us mere mortals, right? It's almost like a max intensity day. And it just sort of shows you that defining a rest day starts to become a little bit more difficult. I remember, this is just a total aside, but Rich Froning making the comment somewhere that his body at regionals felt great because it was less volume than what he was doing to prepare for regionals, which is just sort of crazy.
And regionals was usually like 2 or 3 workouts a day over 2 or 3 days.
Totally. I know. Yeah, it was a pretty high volume, but relative to where he was coming from, it felt like a step down, right? So this is a big hurdle in studying rest days. The person's capacity has a big influence on what they really need rest from. So just take this idea and start to think about it in terms of designing an experiment. You're going to take a bunch of people. You're going to have to put them through the same workout volume. It's going to have to be 5 days a week, 45 minutes. It's going to be these exercises. I'm going to tell you that some people are going to likely need more rest. Others are going to need more training because their initial baseline capacity is going to be so different. And that's what I found in the literature, like a bunch of different results. There was one study that was looking at the performance and they were testing it of like max power 30-second, basically bike sprint, right? They found that average and peak power during those 30 seconds was higher in the group that took 2 rest days after every training day. Now, it was a pretty short study. I think they ended up having it 12 weeks or something like that. But they actually found that more rest days were better than the people that just tried to train consecutively. There was another study that I looked at that was resistance training 3 times a week, and they had one group do all 3 days back to back, and they had another group take the resistance training sessions and spread them over a week with the classic kind of 48 to 72 hours in between, which is what we hear all the time is what you're supposed to rest after a resistance training session. What were their results? No difference in terms of strength or body composition, whether or not they stacked all the days together or whether or not they spread them out over the week. And then there's even studies that find performance improvements of more than 30 consecutive days of training for 1 rep max. I think it was back squat, right? Which kind of reminds me of the central nervous system fatigue episode that we did recently, that heavy lifting doesn't necessarily fry your CNS per se. It's more of the mental fatigue that we need a break from. But the point here is that there's kind of a mixed bag in what we're finding in the research. And I think a lot of it has to do is like, well, what protocol are they testing relative to the individual's capacity is going to have a big influence on whether or not they're still able to drive performance gains. Because if it's less capacity than the person has, then they're going to be able to sail right through the training program. We also have to remember that a big limitation with these studies when we're looking at rest days and performance is that they're going to be relatively short in duration. One was like 6 weeks, one was 12 weeks, one's a month. So people really want to know, how am I supposed to do this optimally over Kelsey's 2.5 years? It's like, we're not going to actually have any research that can do that because the logistics of trying to keep people organized on the same training schedule is just not going to happen for years, right? So in terms of trying to find research that very clearly says longevity in a sport is going to be best at 2 days per week, yeah, it's not out there.
Okay, so shoulder shrug emoji.
Right.
That's what I'm coming away with. Assuming that we don't want to leave Kelsey with just that, what recommendations can you pull from, again, your own experience? You've certainly been doing this for a long time, the research that you read. What kind of takeaways can we start to think about putting into place?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few things to look at. And the big one to look at to understand whether or not you're resting appropriately is performance, which Kelsey pointed out. She said more recently she's seen less performance, but your actual performance in the gym, measured in how much weight you can move, measured in how fast you can complete something, I think is going to be your best indicator if you are getting the balance right between training and resting. Now, of course, there's going to be other factors to look at when you're thinking how your performance is in the gym, like sleep or nutrition. You know, if you didn't sleep at all the night before, I wouldn't be like, okay, it's because I didn't have a structured rest day this week. It's because you didn't sleep the night before, right? So you have to look at some obvious factors. Did you only eat one donut the entire day and tried to run a marathon? Probably not going to work out so well, right? So long as we don't have
these... I tried that once. You're right. It doesn't work.
Assuming that kind of the general diet, sleep, other lifestyle stuff, you didn't just get fired from a job. I don't know what it is. So long as some other basic lifestyle stuff is in place, performance is where you're going to want to look. Now, the problem is we do hit plateaus, as Kelsey pointed out. As you get more experienced, each next PR, each next gain is going to be further and further apart and a smaller and smaller improvement. So I definitely can't say that she's overtraining in her case, but I think it's good to look more for a performance decline than necessarily plateauing. That if you have a collection of days where clearly your performance is trending down versus just plateauing, then that could be a good indication that you are overtraining. So that's the first thing. Is performance actually getting worse? The second one is, I think it's a little bit less useful, but I like it just to help people kind of think about the concept, is what's your readiness to train? And one of the things about rest days is it gives us this break psychologically from training. And I do think it's going to be more necessary for people that are truly competitive, because they just want to step away from the burden that they have to perform. Maybe it's their livelihood or something like that. Kelsey noted in her email she actually feels better from a mental health perspective, and I totally get that. So, you know, in her case, I don't really think she needs a psychological break, but for people that have a little bit more pressure, that's something which the rest days really give us. But checking in on this readiness to train, I think, is a good one. And the readiness to train idea is like, are you mentally and physically ready to get after the workout? Now, the problem with using this as an indicator and why I don't like it is there's going to be many days for us non-competitive athletes who are not motivated to work out. You could say that we're not mentally ready to train, yet what we need to do is just go in the gym and get the first rep started. So this isn't about gauging your motivation. It's really gauging, am I able to get through this workout that would have some productive value? And I know that's not a clear-cut answer, but I think there's just some intuitive knowledge that you're going to have that if you were to step inside the gym that day, nothing productive is going to happen. You're just mentally checked out, you're physically checked out, whatever it is. Okay, that's a day that you need a rest. Conversely of like, oh, I just don't want to train today, but I know I'm going to feel better after I do this 20-minute session. Okay, get yourself in the gym, you're ready to train. The third factor is illness frequently, particularly respiratory tract infections. What we find is that these tend to go up in frequency with higher training volumes, especially in recreational athletes. Now, I would guess that if somebody has a lot of respiratory tract infections, their performance is going to go down. So we're kind of back to the first thing of looking at performance, right? But this is just another potential indicator to think about if you're not really showing if you're plateauing or going down. It's like, hey, am I getting sick a lot? So those are kind of the ones that I would put out there. Definitely look at performance, look for a trend down, potentially just your readiness to train. Do you feel like you can really accomplish something in the gym? And then also illness frequency. Now, we did podcasts on recovery and overtraining syndrome, and the short of it was, no surprise, the best metric to establish whether or not you're moving from overreaching into overtraining syndrome was performance decline. So that's really what I would focus on for people. Very broadly, so that I can try to give people a guideline, that's something that's not amorphous and just principle based, is I think 1 to 2 days a week of rest are great. And you can still see a ton of incredible progress for the recreational athlete in terms of fitness capacity with that type of schedule.
Yeah, the classic. I always think about the classic CrossFit prescription of 3 days on, 1 day off. That was our Bible for a number of years back in the day. Kelsey did one of her questions, and I'm paraphrasing, is should I just sit on the couch or should I go for a walk?
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on like, okay, this is a recovery day or a rest day or whatever we want to call them. What do we do on those days? Should we do anything? Should we do nothing?
Yeah.
Should we catch up on Netflix?
Yeah, I'm gonna push that part of the answer off a little bit and redirect it. The thing that I want people to really focus on, where I think they're going to get the best bang for their buck in terms of recovery, is sleep. It's going to help your muscle repair. It's going to help your alertness
So go
for
to
whatever
bed.
task.
That's the answer. Don't watch Netflix. Go to bed.
Do not watch Netflix. Maybe you can during the day, but if it's past the time that you should go to bed, go to bed. It's going to help with muscle repair. It's going to help with your alertness, especially if you have anything that has some type of coordination. It's going to help with your appetite and eating the right amount to fuel the nutrition. It's going to help with you having enough energy to push yourself in the exercise session above and beyond to become a stronger and fitter athlete, right? And so my belief is that if you are sleeping enough with enough quality, you're going to be able to handle higher training volume and higher training intensities. And remember that sleep isn't just, okay, I was lying in bed for 8 hours. It's how long were you asleep at that? How many times did you wake up? How deep of a sleep? How refreshed you feel in the morning? And you don't need to have all these hundreds of different metrics. You can probably figure this out. You probably know it for yourself right now that generally, yeah, when I get 7 hours of sleep a night, I'm refreshed. Some people are going to be 8. Generally, adults are in the 7 to 9 range. And I know the parents, this is also when they start glaring at us through the podcast screen or through the phone screen.
Hey, I'm one of those, and I can still get enough sleep.
Exactly. And I think that consistent sleep is one of the best exercise hacks out there. I think it's one of the best diet hacks out there. It makes so many things easier the next day. And so when people are it's so funny. I mean, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about evidence for active recovery, but gosh, I think so many people would see better results in so many areas if they put down, the foam roller and go to sleep.
Okay, so we're going to from now on call sleep non-active recovery. What about active recovery? What about the walking and the biking and the dogs and
all the other stuff that people want to do
Yeah.
for recovery, right? It's like, well, what about
Foam
the ice
rolling,
baths
the
and
other
the
things,
foam rolling and the active recovery? Go do a light workout and all this stuff. Yeah, we actually did a full podcast on recovery options. And I do think that this is where there's a lot of kind of junk science of you need to do all this stuff. You need to have this 27-step rest day routine. And I think it's really easy for people to get lost in the weeds of becoming like a better recovery person.
Recoverer.
Right. Yeah. Like the goal here is not to be the champion of recovery practices. The goal here is to recover enough to make your performance better. And I know that sounds like I'm splitting hairs, but I'm not. Like if you think you have this 15-step routine because that quote optimizes recovery, maybe you have decreased, let's say, muscle soreness, but you actually have to check in with performance. I'm assuming you're doing all of this because you want better performance. And it's so easy to stop at like, well, my heart rate variability is increased or my delayed onset muscle soreness is decreased. It's like, okay, interesting. How's the performance? And so that's what we see, is that there could be some stuff that, let's say, reduces delayed onset muscle soreness, but doesn't actually change performance. And so, yeah, well, the links in the show notes to our older podcast will have all of the references on this stuff. But essentially, one of the studies that we talked about, there's things like massage or active recovery, which would be like, hey, go bike for 20 minutes or something like that. And compression garments seem to do the most in terms of reducing pain. Yet that reduced pain doesn't pay off in terms of better performance. Now, I know I sound cold-hearted here. I'm all for reduced pain from a quality of life perspective. But again, I think there's the nuance here is like, well, I have to go to the gym and I have to do this active recovery thing because that's how I'm going to get a better back squat. And it's like, no, do it if you really like it. Do it if it really makes you, quote, feel better in the moment. Fine enough. But we want to get away from thinking that that is actually what's driving optimal performance. We also have things like the popular cold water baths. I still don't have any clue why they're popular. That's a miserable experience. But those
that's why they're popular.
I know. Those also have shown some ability to decrease muscle pain. But what's actually crazy in this case is it seems to have a negative effect on performance, especially with strength development, which is totally at odds with all of the goals of the people that we talked about here on the podcast or get questions from, right? And so this is a perfect example of getting lost in the weeds of recovery. You could hear, quote, studies show cold water baths or cold water immersion reduces delayed onset muscle soreness, which would in fact be correct. And then you could mentally make the leap very logically. Okay, well, I don't want delayed onset muscle soreness. That must reduce pain, and therefore I must perform better. Yet they're not the same thing at all, right? So we really want to, and I know we can't always dive into all of the research to track on all of these things to be like, okay, well, did the foam rolling always increase performance or whatever it is? I think it's better, though, for people just to kind of step back and think about it as like, is this really helping me better tackle the workout the next day? I don't love feeling because, again, you could just be reducing pain and fine enough. But do I generally perform better when I have a full rest day? Do I generally perform better with an active recovery day? That's going to be very hard to track. We can't actually run controlled trials on ourselves. One of the things I find very interesting about looking at training and exercise and how we're going to try to optimize it for ourselves is every passing day of training makes us a stronger and fitter athlete, such that every time you next go in the gym, you don't actually know, was it the rest day active recovery technique that made me a better athlete, or was it the 3 sessions prior I just did that made me a better athlete, right? So there's always these confounding factors, but nevertheless, to try to simplify it a little bit, you want to think about it as after your rest day, whether or not it was an active day, whether it was cold water immersion, like, am I really ready to get after that workout? What makes me the most ready to tackle the workout with gusto and intensity, and follow that practice for you while trending on, hey, what's happening to my real performance?
I'm reminded of one of your nutrition principles that also seem to apply here, which is never one thing.
Yeah, totally. Right? Totally. It's so easy to get so wrapped up into like heart rate variability and just lose sight of, did I actually back squat anymore? Did I actually run any faster? Did I sleep anymore? Like all of these other things that are also going to be influencing that outcome that you want.
Cool. Let's wrap this up. Any closing thoughts? And I think maybe it'd be kind of fun to hear what you do for your own sort of rest day, recovery day protocols, if it's worth mentioning.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of weird to have to say this, but I think this is one of these things that you're just going to have to feel out. Again, we're not going to have the research to say, well, yeah, if you really want to be a top CrossFitter, it's best to always rest 2 days a week and yada, yada. We just don't have that. The good news here is I do think experience is really going to be your guide. I've been working out 5 days a week since middle school, both resistance training and cardio at pretty high volumes at certain points. And you do just start to know. For me, there often is that psychological, I just need to get out of the gym. I just need a day away from this place. And so that's a good indicator. You also know just body-wise, like, yeah, I'm just not going to be able to push today. I think that's what you're going to have to kind of figure out at the individual level. What I do, like I said, I've been pretty consistent for quite some time here. I generally take 2 full rest days a week. generally Thursday and generally Sunday. I tried the whole active recovery thing, especially in kind of more of my CrossFit peak days. I just was never ready. I kind of wanted that break from the gym. And I also just think I wanted a break from movement and thinking about all the whatever performance metrics I'm trying to hit. Like I just wanted that psychological break. So yeah, for me, they're mostly full rest days. Although I guess maybe pickleball's sneaking in there on some of my rest days now. And then I've done this practice, gosh, for all of the years. Every year I take 1 week totally off. And it's not always planned, but it's just 1 full week of rest.
Thank you, C. Thank you, everybody out there. Thank you, actually, Kelsey, for giving us a reason to have this conversation. I appreciate that. Real quick, if folks have questions like this that they want to get into, either a future episode or like, hey, C, it'd be great if you did an episode on this. What's the best way for folks to do that? How did Kelsey figure this out?
Yeah, she clicked reply to an email I sent out. So that's the cue. And sometimes it goes into quick bites, and sometimes they become mini episodes or full episodes.
Amazing. Thank you for sending us your questions. Thank you for your ratings and your reviews. Thank you, of course, for tuning into the show. EC and I will be back next week for a brand new episode of the Consistency Project podcast.